North Alabama School for Organizers presents Fireside Chats, intersectional education through interviews with the organizations and people making real change right now. Listen, learn, and organize with NASO and Fireside Chats.
I think it can be really convenient and preferable for people in elected office to ignore poor people, to ignore Black people, to ignore immigrants. And so part of community organizing is building enough people together that they can't ignore us anymore, to make their life very, very uncomfortable. And so, what we can see is like, when we're smaller, you have to kind of pick your battles with people, right? Because we have to have enough leverage to be able to push a city official, for example, or a city council to do what we need them to do to protect renters. And so we kind of build that in phases. And the more power we have, the more media we can get, the more people we have showing up, for example, consistently at city council meetings, talking about renters' rights, talking about the deplorable conditions that their housing is in. And the more people we can get to vote for their seats or to run against them, then that kind of goes in phases of we start to make them pay attention to us. And I've seen that work. I've seen us win things we never thought we would win at a city council level, and it's because we build enough power that they can't ignore us.
Okay, well, why don't we just get started here and other people can join in. Beth, it's so nice to have you here. Such an honor. I'm just going to read a little bit about you here and we can get started. But Beth Howard is director and organizer for the Southern Crossroads, and you're building alliances with other organizations across the South and dealing mostly with the poor, right? Poor and the working class people. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And you're also heavily involved with what's called Rednecks for Black Lives, which I noticed has been really growing. And it's very nice to have you. I know we were on a podcast a couple of weeks ago together. I think it was like a 2 hour, not a podcast, but a Zoom conference about 2 hours. But can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in this? I know, are you involved with Surge?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I wanted to say thank you for inviting me. It's really exciting and special to be able to talk with you, as I've learned from your work when we are doing literally everything we are doing. And so it's really important to me that we honor that work and that also we're just passing on the baton. And so everything we do now will carry into the future. And so it means a lot. So I thank you so much for having me. But yes, my name is Beth Howard, and I'm the organizing director for Southern Crossroads. And I have been in community organizing for about 15 years. I grew up in rural Eastern Kentucky. And so I grew up working class in a majority white community or in county. And I grew up on a small tobacco farm. It was a small family farm. And my father, he was a surface miner. He worked in strip mining. He dropped out of college in his first year because my brother was born. My parents got pregnant and married very young. My mom was 16. She went to work in a grocery store for many years and then later a factory. And I say that just because that informs so much of who I am and where I come from. And the focus of our work is really working with poor and working people and also majority white communities, because we know that our people have been suffering a lot for so long. And they've received a lot of messages telling them to blame Black people, immigrants, people of color for their suffering. And we have to interrupt that and bring poor and working class white people into multiracial solidarity. And just like we've done that throughout history. And so a lot of my work at Southern Crossroads is to support the organizing work, to do that, to build organizing projects across Appalachia and the South that are built by and organized by the most impacted people, by the systems that we live in. And so that is poor and working class folks. And so a lot of times what we're going to see is a lot of tenants organizing, a lot of unemployed people organizing, disabled folks, and that these will be multiracial coalitions. And so, yeah, so that's what I do and kind of a little bit about where I come from.
Okay. Do you find it difficult working with the Southern poor and working class and trying to gain their trust? I know just from my history, it's been kind of difficult. Mm-hmm. And what do you do? What kind of techniques or organizing do you do to try to get their attention or to get them involved?
Yeah. So the kind of organizing I do and that I was taught is relational organizing. So it's a lot of conversations and it's a lot of listening mostly. And so the way I really try to approach people is just to listen and ask them about their lives and then stop talking. So much of our conversations as humans are really, well, often we don't have them anymore. They're on texting or social media, right? And, you know, so much of our conversations when we do have them are waiting to respond. You know, I'm just listening so I can then tell you what brilliant thing I have to say, and vice versa. And so what I really was trained to do and what I train others and what I practice to the best that I can is to listen. It's such a gift when people really want to talk with you and listen and hear about your life. It happens so rarely. And I find that even in one conversation on somebody's porch can change them, you know, can change the way that they see themselves, the way they make sense of what's happening around them. And so then I think once we are able to build trust through like repeated conversations by continuing to show up places. I think a lot of poor folks know that when people come into their communities, they're only usually there to take things and leave. And so it's also important that we're from those communities and that we are consistent and we show up and we do what we say we're going to do and we build trust. And so then I find that once we have trust and once we've kind of identified like what are the things that not only like are affecting our day-to-day lives, like we can't pay the rent or we're having difficulty putting food on the table, we can't find childcare, you know, we can't find a job, we've been unemployed, or we work 3 jobs and still can't pay the bills. Like once we start to get into that, we also start to be able to think about who else is with me in this and start to see ourselves as part of a community.
How do you see, well, interracial? Okay, do you run into any problems with that? I mean, in terms of racism, in terms of, you know, I know you're trying to organize people of color too, and but you're mostly interested in, you know, reaching the southern white poor, you know, and there's still a lot of racism, you know, within the culture, you know, and how can you deal with that, or how you deal with that? I know, is it the commonalities that they have that you can deal with, you know, that they're both in the same boat and that type of thing? Is that the type of organizing you or approach that you use?
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think is some of the organizing approach you used, but
right.
So, but yes, absolutely. So really, you know, I think for a lot of us, when any kind of organizing we're doing, but especially anti-racist organizing with white folks and poor white people is we have to be patient with people, and we have to be willing to walk with them as they're unlearning a lot of things. You know, everything in our culture is very racist. And, you know, the systems that we live in that oppress us, that benefit a few very wealthy people, thrives on us being divided. And so that's a lot of work for people to go through to start to see the world in a different way and to start to see racism as a divisive tool. And so I think we have to do a lot of being patient, asking a lot of questions, and trying to redirect the conversation towards who's really to blame. And then, like you mentioned, talking about mutual interest. What's our mutual interest in the work that we have to do together to have housing, you know, to have jobs that pay us so that we can live and have a life that, you know, safe jobs that are meaningful. And I think when we start to do that mutual interest work, like what would it mean if we all came together in this, you know, under this, we as renters challenge this landlord so that we had safe housing that we can afford? What would that mean in our day-to-day lives? And just start to really see that and build that unity. And I think through that, we're able to start to see that like racism is just keeping us from the things we want and the things we really need. And it allows us to let that go. And also I believe that you know, a lot of majority white organizing projects, I believe, we start to build and organize with each other. We're also, anytime you're working with poor people, you will work with people of color and Black folks, immigrants, because that's the majority of poor people that will be together or be working together as much as possible. And I think through those relationships, we start to change and transform. We're able to see that a lot of things that we were taught about people that were so hateful are wrong. We want to let those things go, and we start to build real, true, meaningful relationships of trust.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any inroads into the Hispanic community, you know, in terms of working with the field workers or the migrants?
So right now we have one organizing project that's really up and going, and that's our Bedford County List project. It's a tenant organizing project in Shelbyville, Tennessee. And so right now, the majority of their base are poor and working class white single mothers who came together actually in opposition to a white supremacist rally there, and then wanted to keep organizing. And so what they quickly found was people couldn't afford housing. And so they ultimately are now working as a tenant union. And so they are multiracial, and there's a large immigrant community there. And so they are working on doing outreach and knocking on doors. And there has to be a lot of trust built. And so that's what they're doing, is really trying to listen and build trust. And once the tenant union starts to win, I think then other people start to be like, well, we can win if we become stronger and join together. And there's also already multiracial organizing happening, Black folks that are doing organizing there. And so the tenant union is really also a place for poor and working class white people to get kind of organized and join and be a part of the alliance that already exists.
Yeah.
And so we're going to start to build, and Michael's on the call, an unemployed people's union, and start organizing unemployed people in Kentucky. So we're really at the beginning of our work. And also we can look at work that's been done before and in different places as well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. You know, it seems like some of the things that you're doing organizing are the way that we organized. The Young Patriots organized, except we were more inner city. And, you know, it was like, okay, there's not that much difference if you get, you know, if you get a community of people together, it's still Southern people together, you know, and they're still, you know, sharing the culture, you know, and everything else. Like when I went to Chicago, you know, the only thing that kind of held people together was the, you know, the music, the dialect, the food, and even the flag, you know, the Confederate flag, which is still prevalent, you know, in some of these communities. And I think in some of the smaller communities, Do you deal with anything like that in terms of, the Klan or any white supremacist organizations within some of these small towns?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I don't mean to put you on the spot for anything here.
No, well, and I think this is really important about this political moment that we're in, and what our work is right now. We have a very important election coming up, and we are, at this point, really defending, our democracy and our country and the poor folks in it, the Black folks in it, people of color and immigrants, all of us, from, authoritarianism. And so part of that we're seeing, that we've been seeing heightened in years, is white supremacy, very open and protected and encouraged. And so, yeah, definitely, like, our poor and working class tenants who are organizing are receiving intimidation, not just from landlords, which is definitely happening, but also from white supremacists leaving Klan cards on people's doors, Facebook groups popping up, places identifying themselves as patriots that are white supremacist organizing. And so those are the places that I know that our people are getting pushback and intimidation by. And some of that's intimidation by simply having a Biden-Harris sign in their yard. And so we are going to see more and more intimidation by white supremacists, militias, right-wing organizing, all through Election Day and beyond. And we're already experiencing and seeing it. I'm in Kentucky, and so Louisville is just an hour and 15 minutes up the road. And Louisville's a very big city, so not a rural space, but also just to name that, in Louisville, we're also seeing white supremacists, going into the crowd, threatening people, and they're protected. And I think it's
the
really
local.
Go ahead.
Well, I think the local police, especially cops, especially in a small town, will protect them, and definitely our members, and that can be a very threatening situation for you or organizers to come in to try to change the status quo, you might say, and face arrest. Has that happened?
So one of the things we're really thinking of right now is how to protect people and how to protect each other in a small town. It is very different, as you were saying, than being, I'm here in Lexington, let's say. It's a mid-sized city. But it's very different for me to show up and protest here and be very clearly anti-racist or to demand defunding police here than it would be if I were back in my hometown. It's the same as if I were a tenant in a tenant union in my hometown, let's say, or any small town where there are a few landlords and they own everything. And then, their family are judges. They're also on city council, right? And you start to threaten the power structures, and they're so close and tight-knit with police. And also, people don't live so close together. Where I lived, there was a long driveway you had to go down, to get to my house. And, so the feelings of isolation can be very physically isolated, but also I think we don't often know who's with us as clearly when we're in communities sometimes that are rural, because people are like, if we're seeing intimidation like we're seeing in Shelbyville, for example, it's less likely people are going to be more open because they're receiving threats and intimidation, especially if they have young children, and a lot of our members are parents. And so I think that's just a different thing that we're dealing with when we're looking at small towns and rural communities, and that we want to be really careful about and really thoughtful. And so, I think it's really important that we start to know our people and know who has each other's backs, check on each other constantly, and start to think about how to really show up and protect each other. And so we are seeing those threats. We are seeing that close-knit power structures kind of lining up together. And we are also seeing and supporting our people to think about how to keep each other safe.
Ever get that? Well, do you ever get any of the power structure, for instance, the leaders in the community, do that believing in what you want to do, or is it just mostly just neglecting you or harassing, within the community?
I think it can be really convenient and preferable for people in elected office to ignore poor people, to ignore Black people, to ignore immigrants. And so part of community organizing is building enough people together that they can't ignore us anymore, to make their life very, very uncomfortable. And so, what we can see is like, when we're smaller, you have to kind of pick your battles with people, right? Because we have to have enough leverage to be able to push a city official, for example, or a city council to do what we need them to do to protect renters. And so we kind of build that in phases. And the more power we have, the more media we can get, the more people we have showing up, for example, consistently at city council meetings, talking about renters' rights, talking about the deplorable conditions that their housing is in. And the more people we can get to vote for their seats or to run against them, then that kind of goes in phases of we start to make them pay attention to us. And I've seen that work. I've seen us win things we never thought we would win at a city council level, and it's because we build enough power that they can't ignore us. And so I really do believe like it's easier if we have allies in those seats. And sometimes we usually do, usually have at least one or two people that like hopefully care. Sometimes you don't. But the part of organizing that I think is so exciting is that we build a big enough base that we can push them to do the things we want and need them to do, even if they don't like us, and preferably they don't, because that means we're doing something right.
Yeah, I'm speaking of like building management, tenant unions, that type of thing. That I want to propose here in Huntsville eventually is in Chicago, we actually made deals with some landlords that the tenants could actually control the building, and he or she didn't have to do much of anything, and it was actually managed by, the tenants. And that turned out to be very lucrative because the tenants actually, felt that, well, this is something that kind of belonged to them. And they were able, to take care of the building. And I'm wondering if any of these, like these small towns, if any of these landlords, the owners would be willing to do something like that, or even to have, realtors to work with it to do something with that type of, building management. Is that something you've thought about?
I think that's a great thing to put on the table. And I think that's something that, we want to think about. We haven't, that I know of, haven't explored it or anything I've been a part of yet, but I think it's great. And I think, I just saw, and I don't know enough to go into great detail about it, so I probably shouldn't raise it, but I did see a tenant organizing group who we've talked to and learned from in Kansas City who just had a major win and are collectively owning the building and running it together. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good, we had an attorney on last week who lives in a building that's collectively owned, and when we were in Chicago and they were tearing down all these buildings, several people got together and actually purchased some buildings, collectively, and they're still living in those buildings, and I think all they had to do was form a non-for-profit organization, to do that. And anyway, I wanted to kind of back up a little bit about Surge. I know you're involved in Surge, and we're involved in Surge here. We're trying to get it off the ground again. And right now it's beginning to work out a little bit because we're able to recruit some people, to place into different organizations. Now, are there any surge members in, say, some of these towns, small towns, that can help you out as you go in to try to organize?
Yeah, so Southern Crossroads is a project that came out of Surge. And so Surge holds a lot of our admin and like support for our structures. But Southern Crossroads is a vehicle that we've designed that's really to speak to poor and working class people in rural Southern and Appalachian places. And so I believe, yeah, that there are lots of Surge members in places. I don't have the numbers now, but I know people here in Kentucky who are in rural areas who I've also seen at Surge meetings or showing up on webinars and sharing things from showing up for racial justice. And so I think it's a different approach or different constituencies often. Surge is a lot of people showing up to look for Surge. They're like, I want to be involved in anti-racist organizing, so I want to seek out who's doing that, and Surge is doing that and doing a really good job at it. So we're really interested at Southern Crossroads and going and meeting people who aren't with us already and who are often left out of a lot of like middle class, class privileged, liberal, anti-racist organizing spaces. I've often been in spaces that, and throughout all my organizing, not just at Surge, but just always where I'm like, my parents are very directly impacted by the systems that we live in. They've worked their entire lives. They'll never stop working until they die, and also, they would not feel welcome in spaces that I've been in. They're not built for them. They would never come back. And so that really has to be reckoned with. And so at Southern Crossroads, we really want to have our organizing spaces that center poor and working class people, Southern people, Appalachian people. And the space and the culture revolves around them and not trying to pull them into a space that's not built for them where they ultimately don't stay. And a lot of times have not felt welcome. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. You also mentioned something about, did you say you're getting an employment program going?
Michael could talk about that. That's his work. He's on the call here, Michael Harrington. But yeah, wanting to do, having, like we were talking about, initial outreach and conversations with unemployed people in Kentucky. Obviously unemployed people are everywhere, but specifically just thinking about a project in Kentucky because we've got a lot of momentum here to start to, build a coalition of, an organizing group of unemployed folks somewhere in rural Kentucky.
That's something that I think I would be interested in. And with Surge here, and we started an employment agency actually to get people jobs in, on the north side of Chicago, where almost all Southerners. The unemployment, figures there was, this one community had 47% unemployment. There were more people living in this community unemployed than there were jobs in Chicago because of the poor people migrating and not having the skills, to work in a city, or some of them worked in factories, could get jobs there, but most people were like farmers. But just throw out an idea. We had what was called Tri-Faith Employment Agency, and there were 3 different, religions, 3 different church denominations got together and funded an agency, and hired a couple of people that would contact, these companies and other places that needed someone to work. Some of it turned out to be day labor, but it wasn't one of the rip-off day labor, agencies that a lot of people are accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, Chicago, there's really no small towns there. They were all small towns that kind of grew together, basically, with different nationalities. But do you think that's something that might work? And say if there was a headquarters where you're at that could cover some of these small towns, that there would be enough interest from, I don't know, some of these factories that might need somebody, or whatever, that would work with an agency like that there.
Michael, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility for talking about like an employment agent or an employment agency.
Yeah.
The work that we're doing, and Beth is coaching me through this along the way, is to develop workers' councils or unemployed people's unions, whichever way you want to call it, in small counties in Eastern Kentucky. These counties are like 99% white, some of them. But as the work goes, like as the unemployed people in formation go, it's obvious that folks are going to try and want to find work and stuff. Right now, a lot of the folks that I'm talking to, the most important issue to them right now is, how do I get the unemployed benefits that I've been promised, because I've yet to receive my check.
Right. Yeah. That's difficult.
Yeah, and I pulled a stat before I got on the call. I think part of which, we can talk about Rednecks for Black Lives or some of these, political identities that we're working with. But I think, one of the things I've thought a lot about is like, we want to tell our stories, and be the people who get to tell them, not other people telling them for us or making these sweeping generalizations that are false. So part of that is really important to our work. And also I'm like, let's keep looking at the fact that Jeff Bezos made $10.2 trillion during the pandemic, while unemployment, just thinking about unemployment skyrocketed. So I'm like, let's tell that story too. That's really, really important. And so when we start to think about how do people come together across differences, like if we are not outraged but by the fact that these people continue to grow that rich and are that evil and greedy, I need to organize better. So we have got to start pointing that blame right where it belongs and start to really lay out what that looks like and the amount of suffering that we're experiencing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think we should probably do some organizing together, and Surge, and I know I think I read where you're putting together a book of stories, people's stories.
That's Michael too. Michael, you want to talk about that too? You want to talk about some of the programs that you're doing for Southern Crossroads?
Sure, but you should come in and flow, because I think we've jointly developed a lot of these things. Beth was saying that it's important for folks to share their stories on their terms in a way that gives us dignity, because a lot of times the dominant narrative about poor Southern white folks is that we're the unique and specific problem with everything that's wrong with this country, and all evils are because of us. And we know that that's not true. We do know that we don't want to romanticize and be like, we have no problems at all and everything is gravy here, and we're perfect people. But we do want to give folks an opportunity to share their stories on their terms. So we're doing a narrative building campaign that just is a way for folks to share those stories. And I grew up kind of like Beth, in a house with my mama, and she was one of those ladies that loves a daggone photo album, right? And I remember growing up with her and being really interested in talking to her. She'd pull out the family photo album and I'd sit with her and ask, who's that person? What'd they do? I've never seen this person before, because I was young, and a lot of the photos that she had were of folks that had passed away before I was born even. So I grew up just asking stories about the people in the photos that were surrounding our house that I never met. And it was a really rewarding thing for her to do, because I know that she liked to talk about, like, oh, Papa, did this, and your aunt did this. And that's how I got to learn about a lot of my family members. And I think that's a pretty Southern kind of thing too. So we're trying to tell a story of, like, there are a lot of people that are very important to our lives who shaped who we are as organizers, or who we are in our commitment to justice. How did I come to be an organizer? It's mostly because of my mama. She wasn't an organizer or a very, like, hyper political person, but she taught me my sense of justice. And there's something in me that feels like, this is me personally, and my gut says other people feel the same way too, of, like, I wish that more people could hear my mama's story, because she meant so much to me, and she was a fighter. And when I'm feeling down or low, I remember she was a fighter, and she taught me what was right. And we think that stories like that are just as important as stories from, like, movement heroes that we look to for inspiration as well. Like, so somebody like Mother Jones or Florence Reese, or whoever in the South, these, like, movement icons did really important work. We want to situate, like, our personal stories and our family stories alongside a photo collage and a story of, like, our mamas and papas who didn't make it into the history books, but who still mattered to us just as much as anybody else. Just to kind of remind everybody from the South, like, we actually have a long history and lineage and spirit of fighting for what's right and standing up against what's wrong.
Yeah, and I think that tells more of a story than you would get out of any history book, because of the distortions. We've done the same. We have a series of poetry and songs and stories from the folks back in the 60s in Chicago, and that's been published. So we should talk about that, because I'd surely like to do something, along the lines of what this was, because these were folks that, came from Kentucky and Tennessee and, in the mountains, and talk about their lives. And most people, they think that, from the people that I've met, they think a lot of Southern people don't write. But if you look in the Bibles of people, it's stuffed full of all kinds of stuff, and all kinds of history and important stuff that I think we need to get out. But the important thing, it needs to be done by the poor people themselves, that can understand it and show the culture. Because if we talk about organizing, we definitely need to know the culture of the people we're working with, and just as an example of Tennessee, for instance, East, Middle, and West Tennessee, the cultures change a little bit just in those areas, just because of influences within those areas, and even the different Indian tribes that were in those areas. And it's real important and I know that, but I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but that's something that's very respectful to people, and can get them, or at least to help people keep their dignity or regain their dignity. So is there now, are you also putting together some type of a cookbook?
That's
I'm fascinating what you're doing. I really am, and I really want to keep up with it.
That's Michael. Michael wasn't expecting to talk,
Michael.
but I'm so glad you showed up.
Michael, you're into everything, aren't you?
He is.
Well, a lot of it is in the spirit. Beth is being a little modest here. She is she is definitely my coach. Like, I'm running this idea. Beth, what do you think?
These are two working class Southern people who are friends. No, you tell it. You tell what you're doing. No, you tell what you're doing.
Yeah. So kind of similar to what, all of us were just talking about, Beth, I like how you were lifting up, like, when you listen and you share people's stories, you start to get a better sense of what's going on in our lives. And that is what builds a sense of community. And we know, kind of like as Southerners, there's ways that we built community for a long, long time. So for someone like me, I grew up in a really conservative family, in a conservative place, and when I first started like wanting to organize, or my political beliefs were becoming really different from a lot of people in my family and stuff, I did that thing that a lot of us do that I'm ashamed of now, but like wrote off like, oh my God, everything that they did and said and whatever was really dumb, and they don't know anything about what's right. But I was talking to Beth and I was like, actually a lot of the lessons that I learned about organizing that have been useful for me when I'm trying to do these campaigns, I actually learned in a fundamentalist Baptist church. So it's like, you learn a lot about door knocking, you learn a lot about outreach, you learn a lot about potlucks, growing up in a fundamentalist Baptist church. But it's kind of like, we know that there are ways that in the South we do build beautiful culture, and we do show up and support each other, and food is one of the biggest ways that we do that. If anybody on this call hasn't been to at least a handful of potlucks over the past 5 years, I'd be surprised. I think we do that kind of thing all the time, right? And people take pride in it. Like you'll talk to one of your neighbors, and 30 years ago they won a damn blue ribbon for a chili recipe at the fair, and they're still talking about it.
That's right.
But then it becomes a way to like build community, right? So you show up with the potluck with your blue ribbon chili, and it gives you an icebreaker or a story, and it brings people together. So we think food is a way to share those stories.
It is.
A lot of us like feel isolated and alone, but when we remember, well, I learned how to cook my mama's recipe, when I was young, and she would have me shucking beans to like help do the grunt work so she could actually do it. And sharing those stories, because food culture is a way that we bring people together, because a lot of times like people are literally cooking with the purpose of like, I'm gonna bring together a potluck, or we're going to have a block party, or whatever it is.
Yes.
And it's just having those fun things that bring us together to sit around the table so we can talk. And I know people say don't talk about politics and religion at the table, but I don't know if any Southerners like actually live by that rule, because everybody that I knew like did that anyway. So working on a cookbook that combines these stories of, I learned this recipe from my mama who was from this county in this state, and here's how to cook it, and then interspersing that with like organizing like tips, practices, and stories of like how you can bring people together to organize for justice using food as a cultural touchstone.
Absolutely. Which leads me into another question about Rednecks for Black Lives.
Yeah.
And how did that start, and where did that come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So Southern Crossroads has been building for a couple years, or had been, in various stages. And we were really at a moment this year. I came on staff in March. And we were this year going to try to be wanting to be more public facing as an organization, and start to build more organizing projects, start to get more people just kind of thinking about organizing in the South in a different way. And so I always want to say none of this work is new. Like, I already said we were so inspired by the work you've done, like there are so many people who have been organizing in the South or from the South or, doing multiracial alliances and organizing forever. And so those were always inspirations for Southern Crossroads. So all that to say, though, we were trying to think, okay, well, this year we'll roll out our organization in a more public facing way and start to bring more people into it, to identify as members and to start to build more organizing projects like the one we have in Bedford County. And so we were really going to do a really slow, thoughtful, like intentional, or not that what we did wasn't thoughtful, but just the slower pace, like very intentional rollout of the organization. And then COVID hit 2 weeks after I started work, by the way, but COVID hit. And then the uprising started. And it became very, very clear because of the great suffering that we were experiencing from both of those things and a lot of the racist narratives that were taking hold, especially in poor and working class white communities in the South, that we needed to get out front and make an appeal to our people to not listen to the racist dog whistling or outright just racist attacks on Black people in this moment and for always, but to instead to see the great mutual interest we have in working together. And so we wanted to make an appeal to say, come with us, like let's be in multiracial solidarity, because everything we want and need is on the other side of true solidarity with Black people and people of color and Indigenous folks, immigrants. And so we were really thinking, like, how do we do this? What do we say? And so I wrote a couple of things that were kind of garbage. If you are a writer at all or a creative person at all, you write a lot of really bad drafts of things until you finally get something that is like, okay, this might work. And so, we were brainstorming a couple of things and landed on Rednecks for Black Lives. And we're like, this feels like the thing. And so I stayed up all night and kind of wrote a piece that ended up going up on Medium. And I wasn't sure, like we weren't not sure how it would land, but it felt like we had to do it. And it was the right thing to do. And a lot of our work, as we all know, is like just being courageous and doing what we know to be right, even if we don't have it perfect, even if we just have to take risks because the moment calls for it. And so we did, and we got so much affirmation. That Medium piece was viewed like over 60,000 times and was shared. We ended up being on NPR, on Here and Now. We had other press hits. At first, like we got a little bit on the front page of the New York Times, and we were like, that was the first press hit we got. And we're like, there's a couple of hillbillies on the front page of the New York Times now, and so we just started to see a lot of affirmation, and we were able to do a really nice piece with Now This News that's gotten a lot of sharing and affirmation. And so what that tells me is just that it struck a chord with people because we knew that there were more of us out there. We believed they were looking for us just like we were looking for them, and that all of that affirmation has told us that was a correct assessment. And the fact that it's a hashtag or it's on t-shirts or stickers or that there's Facebook groups is just more and more data that's really important to know that we're out here. And I think like a lot of anti-racist work I've been a part of at times has been a lot of like me coming into the group and kind of having to let go of who I am, like let go of my Southernness, let go of my my class identity and kind of conform, because like we said, so much of who gets blamed for racism in this country are often poor white people in the South. Instead of billionaires and crooked politicians and big businesses. And so I often felt like, and I was entering these spaces where it was kind of like I needed to kind of do a solid for Black folks. Like I needed to like do something on their behalf. And what I started to learn, and that I think is so important about Rednecks for Black Lives or the work we're doing in Southern Crossroads, is that it's not me doing an act of charity to show up for anti-racism and to organize in multiracial coalitions, because I gain so much by doing that. My life is better because I'm doing that. All of us have so much to gain. And so we're not targeting poor white people in the South or Appalachia because we're more racist than white people anywhere else, but it's because we have so much to gain by doing this. And so that's the kind of organizing call that Rednecks for Black Lives is making. And so we're like, come with your Southern music, come with your recipes, come with your accent. Like we are for Black lives and defending Black lives because of who we are, not in spite of it.
Yeah. Wow, that's very good. I'm inspired by it.
You inspire us.
Yeah.
And I'm inspired by a lot of, I'm guessing everybody on the call, although I don't know for sure everybody yet, but I know I'm inspired by everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. You can never stop. Some people just can never stop organizing. They got to organize somewhere. And I got a feeling that you have a lot of those people there that just have to. It's not something that sometimes you don't want to, but you have to, but you're going to do it. You're going to change from saying, I can't do something to I will do something, and that seems to me like that's what Southern Crossroads is doing, and you deserve a lot of respect for that. Changing people's lives is very important. Is there anything you'd like to say before we go into some questions?
Yeah, before we get off the call, I have some ways that people could get involved. And so I want to make sure and share them with you all, and I can put links to them in the chat because I think there's some really concrete actions we can take with showing up for racial justice and with Southern Crossroads. Michael's put some of them in the chat already. But I just kind of, I guess, thinking about Rednecks for Black Lives, we've talked a lot about, that Southern folks are really rebellious, but we want that rebelliousness. We don't want it to go away. We just want it to be channeled for the right reasons. And, I've always been like, well, I've never known, for better or worse, like a Southerner, to back down from a fight. And so we are in the fight of our lives right now. And so we've got to tap into that because, we've got to fight and win this. So.
Yes. Oh, yes. Okay. Questions, anyone? Who's got some questions out there? I know, Reggie, you got to have something. You always.
Yeah. Oh, no, I've got a reputation now. I did sort of. Beth, do you have any stories of what success looks like that you might be excited about sharing? Where you found a problem, you found what's causing it, and you think maybe you fixed it. Because we don't get a whole lot of narratives like that in this business.
No, it's so true. It's so true. So I've been fortunate to work on some winning campaigns, which is really great. Their wins are few and far between sometimes. And we always say celebrate early and often. And so, I do want to say, I don't know if anyone from Bedford County is on here with the listening project, but they've had a lot of victories along the way in their work already. And are still building and doing amazing things. And so they're welcome to come off mute if anyone's here. I'm not sure, but I always want to say that because they can speak for their work brilliantly. But from my own organizing experience, I would say I got to work on a campaign in Florida. I started organizing in Florida. They sent me from Eastern Kentucky University, Richmond area, and sent me to Florida to learn to organize. So I worked in Daytona Beach, Volusia County. I first went to Jacksonville, but worked in Volusia County, Florida, and Daytona Beach, which I always said was Eastern Kentucky at the beach, which I loved. So anyway, there's a lot of NASCAR, cheap beer, motorcycles. So it was perfect. And so, but we organized, we were a multiracial congregation-based community organization. And so a lot of faith-based organizations coming together to make changes in the community. And so one of the things we won is to get a substance abuse treatment program in the county jail, because they were arresting so many people on drug charges, people without homes, constantly. And then there was no treatment options for them. It was just a revolving door, and just providing no services to anybody in the community, for housing, for treatment options, and just to have like a life that they deserve. And so we organized and got a substance abuse treatment program in the jail for folks who were arrested and staying in the jail. And we also kicked a really terrible mental health provider out of the jail who was taking people off all of their medications upon when they were being when they were coming in the jail when they were arrested, and so taking them off their mental health medications, and people were having obviously like suffering a great deal while they were in jail, and then being released and then not having access to things that they needed, and so we kicked that provider out of the jail and got the local nonprofit provider into the jail. And so we won that campaign. And since I left there, they continued working, and they now have a shelter that's like an all-service shelter where people, houseless people, can go there and get services that they need and stay there. So it takes many, many years sometimes, but they build. And so sometimes we win. But we won that by just perseverance, like just years and years of just showing up and being as assertive and loud, and we're not going anywhere as possible. And we did it in a multiracial coalition. So
Right.
Thanks.
yeah, thanks for asking. It's fun to talk about those. Don't do that enough.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk about successes.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always talking about problems and what's wrong, but there's a lot of things right that we get. So
yeah, like the old saying, success is failure turned inside out. So kind of have to look at it that way, I guess.
yeah.
But well, I'm going to be respectful of your time.
Okay.
Looks like we've reached our limit here. Is there anything else that you want, or?
Yeah, so I wanted to thank everybody first. Of course, thank you so much for coming and contributing and being here. Michael shared some things about sharing your family story and family photos, and then also a recipe for the cookbook. We would love to have you all submit those. And then we have, as we identified, like there's a really important election, and this is a really important political moment, and we've all got to show up and fight. And so showing up for racial justice is doing a phone bank, calling white voters in Georgia, asking them to vote against Trump, vote against fascism. And so you can sign up if you want to make calls to do that. The link there, it says Swing Georgia Left, and you can sign up there. I'm going to make volunteer recruitment calls to get callers to continue the phone bank. So we'll be doing that up until the election. And we've seen record numbers of people standing in line to vote in Georgia, early voting. And so that we hope that that's promising for our side. And then also there's a variety of ways that you can be an election defender through Surge. And so I put the link there, and you can kind of take a look at the different ways they're plugging people in to defend our election. So we would love to have you all sign up for that too.
And if I can just jump in, I'm one of the election defenders coaches for Florida. Yeah, and Florida's not playing this time. We had 10 people sign up. I figured maybe 4 of them would stay in. 8. I've got 8 people still doing it, so I'm super excited about that. And also because we're talking about Florida, that's where I'm at. I just started working with Seed the Vote, which so they're actually looking for people who can come to Florida and knock on doors and don't want any kind of financial issues to be a barrier to that or anything. So if anyone has time and the desire to come to Florida and knock on doors, then you need to come. We'll get you here. And if I'm just going to put the link in the chat for the information about it, if anybody wants to. And it's so funny that you came to Florida to learn how to organize, and I live in Florida, and I'm like, how? That's backwards. Like, I've gone everywhere else to learn except for Florida. Except I think I have learned in Florida just because it's so freaking hard. But that's all. We should talk more about the.
We should,
things.
yeah.
So, yeah, for sure.
For sure.
But, yeah, thanks for letting me sit in. It was great.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Rachel, and for the work you're doing.
Yeah, and everything you put up here, I will put into our surge chapter. You know, it's very large. There's about 1,500 members in this, and they're from all over the country too. So I think we may be able to get you some volunteers there too.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay. And I'm excited about forming a partnership, you know,
Yeah,
with
me too.
Southern Crossroads and Nassau. I think we can do some very good, you know, educate to organize is our motto. And so that's exactly what you're doing. That's what we're doing. So let's just put it together and, you know, just really do a bang up job with it.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do it. Let's
All
do
right.
it.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Fireside Chats is a production of North Alabama School for Organizers. NASO seeks to empower communities through intersectional education and training. More information, including upcoming classes, at naso.network. Thank you for joining us for Fireside Chats.